It started on the day I stood in my father's empty house, staring at walls that no longer felt like home, and realized that grief wasn't the worst thing waiting for me there. Betrayal was. I remember Marcus's voice echoing down the hallway before I even saw him, calm, measured, already sounding like he owns the place. And Clara's heels clicking behind him, sharp and deliberate, like punctuation marks sealing my fate. And before I could even set my suitcase down, Marcus looked at me the way people look at problems they've already decided to solve. And he said, almost gently, "Elena, we've taken care of everything." And something in my chest dropped because I knew right then that everything didn't include me. And I wanted to scream, to ask what that meant, but my throat locked and my hands shook, and all I could think was how my father used to stand right there by the stairs every evening, sleeves rolled up, asking me about my day like it actually mattered, and now he was gone, and so was my place in this family. And if you've ever felt that moment, when the ground disappears beneath you without warning, then you already know how this story feels, because it's the kind of pain that doesn't shout, it just sits there, heavy, waiting to crush you when you're weakest. And if you've ever wanted to see betrayal answered with intelligence, patience, and karma that cuts deep, then listen closely, because this is where it all truly begins. If you've ever been pushed aside by people who share your blood, if you've ever been told without words that you don't belong anymore, then stay with me, because this isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when someone decides they will never be erased again. And before we go any further, let me ask you this. What would you do if your own family quietly wrote you out of existence and expected you to accept it? I grew up believing family meant safety, believing that no matter what the world did to you, the people who shared your name would never turn their backs. And for most of my life, that belief came from my father, Thomas Wright, a man who worked himself to exhaustion building a business from nothing, who taught me how to read contracts before I was old enough to drive, who told me again and again that integrity was the only inheritance worth fighting for. And Marcus, my older brother, was always there too, louder, more confident, already practicing the role of successor long before our father ever got sick. And for years, I thought his sharp edges were just part of being the eldest, part of carrying responsibility. But Clara arrived later, polished and smiling, eyes always calculating, the kind of woman who never raised her voice, but somehow always controlled the room. And I didn't notice at first how conversations shifted when she entered, how decisions suddenly made sense only to her and Marcus, how my father's trust slowly became something they borrowed without asking. Before everything collapsed, my life was simple in the best way. I worked in my own corner of the company, handled research, contracts, quiet problem solving, the kind of work that keeps things running but never earns applause. And I liked it that way, because my father saw me, and that was enough. And when he died suddenly, the world didn't stop, it just became colder. And I came back to the house expecting tears, memories, shared grief, but instead I walked into a meeting already in progress, legal folders stacked neatly on the dining table, Clara sitting in my father's chair, Marcus standing behind her with his hands on the backrests like a claim. And they talked at me, not to me, about restructuring, about efficiency, about how it's better this way. And I listened as they explained, without a shred of guilt, that my name had been removed from the estate, that my shares had been reassigned, that my role was no longer necessary. And the worst part wasn't even the words, it was the tone, the certainty, the way Clara smiled softly as if she were doing me a favor. And I felt small in that moment, smaller than I ever had in my life. And my mind raced through memories of my father promising fairness, promising protection, and I realized how easily promises die when the person who made them can no longer speak. I argued, of course. I demanded explanations, proof, something, and Marcus's face hardened in a way I had never seen before, his voice dropping low as he told me I was being emotional, that I didn't understand how things worked, that I should be grateful they were even letting me take a few personal items. And that was when I understood the power imbalance fully, because grief had weakened me, and they knew it, and they used it. and Clara watched silently, eyes bright, absorbing every crack in my composure. And when I finally left that house with one suitcase and nowhere to go, it wasn't just my inheritance they'd taken, it was my identity, my history, my belief that love could survive ambition. The months that followed were a blur of cheap apartments, sleepless nights, and the kind of loneliness that creeps into your bones. And I questioned myself constantly. Maybe I missed something, maybe I deserved it, maybe I was naive. But every time doubt tried to settle, anger pushed back harder, because deep down I knew the truth. And the truth was that Marcus and Clara didn't just want control, they wanted erasure. And so I did the only thing left to me. I disappeared, not in defeat, but in preparation. I changed my name, cut ties, left the city, and rebuilt myself piece by piece. And if you think revenge begins with rage, you're wrong, because mine began with discipline, with nights spent studying finance, law, corporate structures, with days spent observing people who wield power quietly, with learning how to be invisible when needed and unforgettable when it mattered. And every lesson, every skill, every connection I made was fueled by one thought: I will never be powerless again. Years passed, and the pain didn't vanish, but it sharpened into focus. And I watched from a distance as Marcus's empire grew, as Clara positioned herself as the visionary behind it all, as interviews painted them as the perfect power couple. And I learned everything about them, their habits, their weaknesses, their secrets. And the more I learned, the clearer the pattern became. Because greed leaves fingerprints, and Marcus was careless, signing deals too quickly, trusting the wrong people, cutting corners when he thought no one was watching. And Clara covered for him, manipulated narratives, threatened quietly, smiled publicly, and together they built something impressive on the surface and rotten underneath. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic explosion. It came in silence, one night when I stared at my reflection and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. And that moment felt terrifying and calm at the same time, like stepping on ice knowing it will hold or break. And I decided then that revenge wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be violent, it would be precise. And I returned under a new identity, professionally untouchable, socially respected, and I positioned myself close enough to observe without being seen, close enough to influence without suspicion. And the first phase was subtle: introductions, investments, friendly conversations, the slow weaving of a web that looked like opportunity. I became a name people trusted, a problem solver, a connector, and through me, Marcus met partners who asked the wrong questions, auditors who noticed small inconsistencies, advisors who planted seeds of doubt, and Clara sensed it before Marcus did, her eyes narrowing in meetings, her tone sharpening at home, because control slipping away feels like suffocation to someone like her. And as pressure mounted, cracks formed in their marriage, whispers replaced trust, accusations followed sleepless nights, and I watched as the empire they stole began to devour itself. And each small win felt less like joy, more like inevitability, because once truth starts moving, it doesn't stop. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was already too late. And when the final evidence surfaced, fraud, misappropriation, illegal transfers, the fallout was public, brutal, and unstoppable. And standing there, watching Marcus's face drain of color as the truth unraveled, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, but release. And when I finally stepped forward and told them who I was, there was no shouting, no threats, just silence heavy enough to crush them. And I told them I wasn't there to destroy them, only to expose what they had built on lies. And as authority stepped in and reputations collapsed, I walked away knowing I had reclaimed more than an estate, more than a name. I had reclaimed myself. Now, as I tell this story, I don't feel the need to justify what I did, because justice doesn't always wear a badge or carry a gavel. Sometimes it simply reveals the truth and lets consequences do the rest. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that being underestimated is painful, but it's also powerful because it gives you space to become something unstoppable. And if this story shook you, if it reminded you of your own scars or your own quiet strength, then remember this: no one gets to erase you unless you let them. And sometimes the most satisfying revenge is walking away with your dignity intact, while those who wronged you finally face themselves. So, if you made it this far, it means this story didn't just play in the background, you felt it. If you believe the most dangerous revenge is the one served with patience and intelligence, don't forget to subscribe. This channel brings stories where people are betrayed, broken, and then rebuild themselves stronger than ever. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit the bell icon, because the next story might hit even closer to home.